They said it wasn't humanly possible. All the power and excitement of Nintendo right in the palm of your hand. Introducing Game.
I don't know about you, but I find that modern technology can be overstimulating. Whenever I open my phone, I'm bombarded with an array of flashing lights and loud noises, all carefully designed to capture my attention and keep me scrolling. I think it might be breaking my brain a bit. Clearly, I'm not alone in feeling this way. In the past few years, a number of people have turned to dumb phones, simple, feature-limited devices with minimalist user interfaces. Unlike smartphones, dumb phones are not supposed to hold your attention for longer than they need to. But what if I was in the market for, say, a dumb game console? Let's be real. Most modern game consoles feature many of the same design annoyances as smartphones. Obtrusive notifications, constant updates, obnoxious advertisements, and unavoidable storefronts made to suck your wallet dry. Wouldn't it be nice if I could snap my fingers and summon a console that wasn't hell-bent on capturing my time and attention? Something so understimulating that it couldn't hijack my brain, even if it tried? And no, I'm not talking about the Playdate. Sorry, Playdate, you're cool, but I can't afford you. No, I'm talking about the original Game Boy, Nintendo's first 8-bit handheld. This chunky hunk of plastic features a black and white screen, a 2.2 MHz clock speed CPU, and a whopping 64 kilobytes of RAM, which is also more RAM than any of us will ever be able to buy again in our lives. I've spent the past few weeks combing the Game Boy's catalog and playing some of the console's premier titles, and it's taught me a lot about how game design has changed over the years. It's been a really fascinating journey, but before I get into it, let's start with some history. In 1987, Nintendo was in a unique position. The runaway successes of the Game & Watch and Nintendo Entertainment System made Nintendo a household name, but the company still saw itself as the small family business it had been for nearly 100 years prior. While I wasn't able to find exact statistics, we know that, in the 1980s, Nintendo was still a fairly small organization that mostly hired nerdy college graduates like these guys. It would take another hit for the company to see itself as the entertainment giant it had become. Enter the Game Boy. The Game Boy was the brainchild of Gunpei Yokoi, the designer behind the Ultra Hand and Game & Watch, among other toys and electronics. Yokoi wanted to create a low-cost successor to the Game & Watch that epitomized his design philosophy of, quote, lateral thinking with withered technology. See, throughout his career, Yokoi hoped to take old technologies and repurpose them in new and exciting ways, eliminating the supply chain and cost issues that so often accompany new devices. This philosophy of Yokoi's still influences Nintendo today. The Wii and the Switch both utilized older and cheaper chipsets, favoring innovative gimmicks over simple computing power, to reduce consumer costs and make manufacturing easier. Yokoi imagined the Game Boy would use a dot matrix display, a technology that had been in use since the 1920s. Nintendo's current flagship handheld, the Game & Watch, which I've mentioned a few times now, used a segmented LCD screen that could only show a limited number of images per system, as each image had to be baked into the display at the time of manufacturing. Conversely, the Game Boy screen would be able to generate images in real time through pixel-based rendering. Satoru Okada, Yokoi's assistant, realized that the modular nature of dot matrix displays meant that players would no longer be limited to one game per device. Instead, they could use cartridges to load however many games they wanted. Yokoi disliked this idea, but decided to let Okada lead development of the Game Boy anyway. Designing the Game Boy was a long and arduous process. Responsibility for manufacturing the Game Boy screen flip-flopped between two competing electronics companies, Sharp and Citizen. Sharp eventually beat Citizen, winning the contract with Nintendo, but Sharp failed to produce good screens for the Game Boy's prototype, and the project was cancelled by Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi. Though Okada was reassigned to another project, Yokoi kept tinkering with the Game Boy, eventually learning of a new dot matrix screen in development at Sharp. He was able to get one of these prototype screens and install it on a new Game Boy prototype. This device impressed Yamauchi enough to revive the Game Boy project. Using a newer dot matrix display meant that Nintendo would not be able to meet its target price of 10,000 yen. Instead, it would retail for 12,500 yen, which, adjusting for inflation, is equivalent to around 95 US dollars today. And with that, the Game Boy officially launched in Japan on April 21st, 1989. It was a smash hit, selling 720,000 units by August. The handheld then launched in North America on July 31st, where it was bundled with Tetris. It quickly became the most popular toy of the holiday season, routinely selling out at retailers across the country. In 1990, the Game Boy launched in Europe, also with Tetris, where it found similar success. In just a year, it had sold well over 1 million units. Game Boy was now a worldwide phenomenon. I don't have much of a personal history with the Game Boy. I'm a Gen Zer, so I was born well after its release. I remember playing a handful of Game Boy games as a kid, but finding them all to be too difficult and archaic for my developing brain. Still, I've always been interested in checking out the Game Boy's library, so I figured, why not do so now? Winter is always a slow period for new game releases, making it the perfect time for a trip to the past. So let's dive in and see what the Game Boy has to offer us in the 21st century. By the way, I'll be emulating most of these games on RetroArch and the Switch Online app. The footage you see here is from RetroArch because I don't own a Switch capture card. Anyway, let's begin. As I said earlier, Tetris was bundled with the Game Boy in North America and Europe. So let's start there. What can I say about Tetris that hasn't already been said? If a perfect game exists, it's this one. I could play Tetris for hours and hours on end without getting bored. In fact, I already have, though I'm still pretty bad at it. The big question, then, is how good is this port of Tetris? And the answer is quite good. This is Tetris, all right. It feels nice to play. The blocks all have distinct textures which disrupt any visual monotony. Even the music is bangin'. It's easy to see why Nintendo chose to bundle Tetris with Game Boy consoles. It's easy to pick up and play for a few minutes, making it perfect for the short play sessions that handhelds enable. But it also contains enough depth to stay interesting for many hours, giving players a reason to keep using their Game Boys long after the first or second sessions. It's fantastic. While one team at Nintendo was busy porting Tetris, another team was hard at work on the Game Boy's first Mario title, Super Mario Land. The original Super Mario Bros., while primitive even by NES standards, was still a pretty complex game to adapt for the Game Boy. The developers had to ensure the controls stayed responsive on the Game Boy's low-end hardware. They also had to figure out how to cram music onto such a small cartridge, but their biggest challenge was making the sprite work readable on a small black and white screen. In Super Mario Bros., the developers used color to make sure Mario stood out from enemies and platforms. In Super Mario Land, they had no such luxury. They also had much less screen space and less memory to hold unique sprites. Additionally, Mario Land takes place in a bunch of different locations with unique tile sets, all of which had to be clear and readable. I'm happy to report that Super Mario Land succeeds in overcoming all of these challenges. For a launch title, this game is still seriously impressive. Though it's not very long, this is a full Mario platformer on a handheld, which I imagine was pretty wild at the time. But this isn't just a rehash of Super Mario Bros., it's a unique game in its own right. Mario Land doesn't just take place in the Mushroom Kingdom, instead it takes place in an entirely different world, Sarasa Land. Here, Mario is tasked with rescuing Princess Daisy, who makes her first appearance as a captive of evil aliens. You heard that right, this game has aliens, and it's very strange. For example, Mario begins each level in front of a UFO, which is never explained in-game or in the manual, I checked, and is not at all a reoccurring event in the series. All the manual really tells us is that Daisy has been kidnapped by one-time villain Tatanga, who has hypnotized all of Sarasa Land, though I guess story doesn't matter, it's a Mario game. Sarasa Land is split into 4 kingdoms, each of which is themed after a different region. I particularly like the first kingdom, Burabuto, which is located in a vast desert. It's the little details that make this place stand out. The developers didn't have to add pyramids and hieroglyphics, but they chose to anyway, sacrificing valuable memory space for the sake of vibes. Super Mario Land also features great music, all of which was composed by Hirokazu Tanaka. Tanaka worked on music for a number of early Nintendo games, including Metroid I and the first two Mother games, though he stepped away from music to become the president of Creatures Inc. in 2001. There's not much music in Mario Land, this is a Game Boy game after all, but what's here is quite catchy. Side note, I do have to take a moment to comment on the Fireball power-up. Seriously, what's going on here? It's ridiculous. I love it. Additionally, the game has a couple shmup sections which are unique for the series but not very interesting. At the end of the day, this is a Mario game, and platforming is front and center. While I can't say I'm the biggest fan of Mario Land, it's certainly charming and has honestly aged quite well. It's not revolutionary by any means, but it's a good time. But we're not finished with the Red Plumber yet, because in 1992, Nintendo released Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins, and wow! This, right here, is how you do a sequel. Mario Land 2 plays a lot like its predecessor, with numerous tweaks and improvements that bring it in line with the console games. For example, the fire flower is fixed, and Koopa shells actually behave like they do in the mainline entries. These changes are welcome ones, but they're not what makes this game so special. What really elevates Mario Land 2 above its predecessor are the game's unique and interesting levels. The first zone most players may stumble upon is the Tree Zone. Each level in the Tree Zone takes place in a different part on a single huge tree. You start on the forest floor, fighting toads and other woodland creatures, before making your way up the trunk's sap-filled center. The tree sap is sticky enough to climb on, which leads to super memorable platforming challenges. Another level in this zone takes place inside a beehive, where you have to take on bees of different shapes and sizes. As you can see, the theming of each level is so distinct and deliberate, which makes the world of Mario Land 2 feel alive. I also enjoyed the Mario Zone. This world takes place inside a giant mechanical Mario. Each level has you moving through a different part of the machine. There's a lot of really creative and abstract level design here. I particularly like this one level that's filled to the brim with bouncy balls. It's so different from everything else in the game. The visuals feel very experimental for its time, and the circular platforms are really fun to jump across. And I have to talk about the Macro Zone. This world is sort of a predecessor to Tiny Huge Island from Mario 64. You play as a shrunken down Mario in a big house, stomping on ants and hopping across kitchen tiles. It's really silly, and it made me smile ear to ear. Oh, and did I mention that this game is totally non-linear? You can tackle each of the game's worlds in any order. If you get stuck on a level or just want a change of scenery, you can simply return to the world map and go somewhere else. I bring this up because it's something that very few 2D Mario games have done before or since. The music in this game is also quite good. This time around, it's not composed by Tanaka, but by Kazumi Totaka. This is one of the first games Totaka worked on, and since then, he's gone on to make music for the Animal Crossing games, several Yoshi platformers, Luigi's Mansion, and Wii Sports. Overall, I really enjoyed my time with Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins. I can totally see why it's held up as one of the best Game Boy games. It's one of the few games I've played for this video that's actually aged very gracefully. If you play a single Game Boy platformer, make it this one. Super Mario Land 2 is well worth your time. Next up, I booted Donkey Kong, which I figured was a straight conversion of the arcade game. Donkey Kong is one of my least favorite arcade classics. I suck at it, and I don't care to get much better either. I figured I'd just boot it up, die a few times, and call it quits. But I somehow managed to beat all 4 levels of Donkey Kong, and that's when I found out this game is actually the first entry in the Mario and Donkey Kong series. This isn't an arcade game at all, no. It's a puzzle platformer. We play as a very agile Mario, and during each level, we have to figure out what combinations of flips and tricks will allow us to bring a key to the exit. Mario's animations are really impressive for the Game Boy. He even has unique death animations for each enemy and hazard. Still, I'm not a fan of this game. I've never been a fan of Mario and Donkey Kong games, and this is no exception. I found it to be far more tedious than fun. I'm sure I could get the hang of the controls if I put enough effort into it, but right now they feel pretty imprecise and unintuitive. I'd say that Donkey Kong is worth a look if you're curious, but know that you're getting into a puzzle platformer and not an arcade game. Published in 1993, The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening is the original Game Boy's only proper Zelda game, and it's a doozy. In this game, Link is washed up on the shore of a mysterious island. Here he meets Marin, a girl who lives in a nearby village. With Marin's help, Link is able to get his bearings, and he embarks on a grand adventure to find his way home. Though I'm a Zelda fan, I've always preferred the 3D games to the 2D ones. It's hard for me to explain why I'm not a big fan of 2D Zelda. I think it's because the worlds of the 3D games just feel so much bigger and full of life. I find it much easier to immerse myself in the fantasy of Hyrule when it's presented in 3D. And yet, Link's Awakening still managed to charm the pants off me. If I had to describe this game with one word, it would be cozy. This is a classic Zelda game, only smaller and sillier. Koland Island may not be very large, but it's packed to the brim with cool enemies and funny villagers. We even see characters from other Nintendo games, such as the Chain Chomps from Mario and the Gordos from Kirby. But the stakes of this adventure are much lower compared to those in the main games. As such, the game takes on a rather chilled out and sunny atmosphere. Playing Link's Awakening feels like wandering around your hometown as a kid in early summer. You don't have to rush from one place to another. Instead, you can explore at your leisure, following whatever piques your interest. It's a very comforting experience. In 1998, Link's Awakening received an enhanced port for the Game Boy Color that added color graphics alongside a few new features. Then, in 2019, the game was remade for the Nintendo Switch by Grezzo. I've played both of these versions before, but neither really clicked with me. In adding more detail, I think they lose some of the mystery and fantasy of the black and white original. There's something really special about the low-fidelity graphics of the Game Boy version. They're just detailed enough to support the gameplay, while leaving space for my imagination to fill in the gaps. The music is also very memorable. Most of the tracks here are entirely original, though the developers do use some of that classic Zelda fanfare at key moments. Overall, I had a really good time playing Link's Awakening for this video, and can totally see myself finishing it in the near future. It's a really fun game. The swordplay is snappy, the dungeons are unique, and the puzzles are clever. Like Super Mario Land 2, this is one I can easily recommend to anyone interested in the Game Boy library, though you probably didn't need me to tell you that. Metroid II: Return of Samus is difficult. At the beginning of the game, you're dropped on an alien planet with no objectives and no map. All you have to go on is a small counter in the corner indicating that there are 39 Metroids out there and that it's your job to kill them all. Killing a Metroid is relatively easy. They hit like trucks, but you can quickly take them down with a few missiles. The hard part is actually finding the Metroids. Seriously, I don't know how anyone can beat this game without a guide. I played this game for quite a while and only managed to find a few Metroids. It's tough, but hey, apparently this is the most linear Metroid game, so maybe I'm the problem. At least Metroid 2 looks and sounds great. The music is so atmospheric. It's creepy and it adds a lot of character to the environment, making exploration much more interesting. The sprite work is comparable to Metroid 1, but a little more polished. The Game Boy's monotone palette definitely suits the moody tone of the Metroid series. Metroid 2 is also unique in that it has proper save points. You have to remember, this came out in an era when many games still used password systems. Thank God we don't do that anymore, not that we could anyway, since modern games are much more complex. If you're interested in playing Metroid 2, I'd stick to the 3DS remake, Samus Returns, or the fan remake, AM2R. Not only do these versions look and sound better, they're also filled to the brim with quality of life improvements that make them the definitive versions of Metroid 2, at least in my mind. Castlevania is the only series featured in this video that I don't have much affection for, nor do I have much experience with it, and to be entirely honest, this game isn't doing much to turn me into a Castlevania fan. This is old school Castlevania. It's an arcade-style game. You have to fight enemies and clear rooms until you win or run out of lives. Like other Castlevania games, Legends is hard. While playing this game, I died an embarrassing amount of times. This one room in particular really got me. It has so many pits, and if you fall in one of them, you immediately lose a life. Because this is a Game Boy game, it's also a little janky, which makes the punishing difficulty a tad more frustrating compared to the console games. I will say the sprite work here is top-notch. The animations are fluid and expressive, and this portrait of the main character might be the best art I've seen in a Game Boy game, period. I'd rather look at Legends than play it. I'm just not enough of a Castlevania freak for this one. Sorry. Before we get to the final game, I want to bring up a couple more titles that I played for this video but decided not to discuss at length. The first of those games is Super Mario Land 3: Wario Land. This game really isn't for me, and I don't think I'd be adding anything to the conversation by talking about it. If you like this style of platformer, I'm sure you'll find something to enjoy here, but I don't feel the need to play any more of it than I have. The second game I played but don't really want to talk about is Final Fantasy Adventure. The problem here is entirely a skill issue. This game is really hard, and I just don't have the patience to sit through this super long intro scene every time I die in the first level. The game did at least let me name my character Pooh? With a question mark, and I liked that. Alright, I've saved the heaviest hitter for last. This wouldn't be a proper Game Boy video if we didn't talk about Pokemon. Pokemon Red, Green, and Blue all released in Japan in 1996, 7 years after the Game Boy's launch. The rest of the world wouldn't get Pokemon until 1998, 9 years after launch. Of course, this didn't stop Pokemon from becoming an overnight sensation. Today, I'd argue that it's the Game Boy's defining series, with Tetris coming in a close second. So, what's it like to actually play these games in 2025? For this video, I decided to play Pokemon Blue, since the Squirtle evolution line are collectively my favorite Pokemon. Full disclosure, I'm a lifelong Pokemon fan. This may have been my first time playing Pokemon Blue, but hearing the opening theme was still a very nostalgic experience. What surprised me about Pokemon Blue was how many iconic aspects of Pokemon are present in this first game. Like Kirby, Pokemon is a series that came out swinging. Pokemon Blue doesn't just look and sound like a Pokemon game, it plays like one too. Of course, one could argue that Kirby and Pokemon's debut games resemble later entries because both series have been very slow to evolve. While that might be true, I think it's commendable that both series were created with such excellent craftsmanship that they could remain relevant for decades without changing much. I thought it'd be hard to forgo the quality of life features like XP share that I've gotten used to, but it really wasn't. However, it was difficult to adjust to the slow pace of battles, especially since I've been playing a lot of Pokemon Legends ZA for the Switch too. I have to say though, after staring at boring 3D models for so long in that game, I was glad to see some actual expressive pixel art. Gen 1's art is just so great. Many of these original Pokemon designs are weirder and more stylized than their modern counterparts, featuring odd proportions and expressions. As such, I found them to be much more aesthetically interesting too. These original 151 monsters feel different from the rest. Some are cute, but just as many are creepy, ugly, or off-putting. These Pokemon don't feel as if they were designed to sell toys or cards. Instead, they feel like organic artistic creations, the product of a few artists' brilliant imaginations. Another thing that stood out to me while playing Pokemon Blue was the localization. Pokemon Blue came out at a time when Japanese developers were just starting to care about funding good English localizations. It's clear that Nintendo worked hard to ensure that the English Pokemon names were fun and appealing to kids. While each name is polished and fitting, the rest of the game's text is all over the place. It's not a bad translation, it's just weird, which I actually really enjoyed. Do you think modern Nintendo would put a Stand By Me reference in the game's opening area? What about a rival that's actually kinda mean? These details kept me on my toes, and they added a lot to my overall experience of Pokemon Blue. It's really cool to play a Pokemon game that was developed before the series became an international phenomenon. Unlike modern mainline entries, Pokemon Blue doesn't come across as a cheap or safe game. It feels risky and experimental. On one hand, I'm amazed that something so outlandish found such immense mainstream success. On the other hand, this game is so special that it's hard to imagine it failing. It's pure lightning in a bottle. It's been a blast to go back and play all these older titles. I'm still amazed at how much stuff these developers were able to fit on such tiny cartridges. With only a sliver of storage space, they managed to make games that look and sound great to this day, and are full of innovative and novel mechanics. It sounds foolish in retrospect, yet going into this video, I was kind of worried that the Game Boy's rudimentary graphics would hamper my enjoyment of these games. But if anything prevented me from liking some of these titles, it wasn't the old school graphics, it was the old school game design. Still, even if a game didn't click with me, I could admire the creativity of the many talented programmers and artists who pushed this little, cheap, underpowered machine to its limits in search of delivering new experiences to players. While all of the games featured in this video are very different from each other, they all share one thing in common: passion. Somehow, the primitive nature of these games only make it easier for me to see the love and care that went into creating them. Playing Game Boy games almost feels like playing indie games, but from a time before the indie genre really existed. Here you have small teams of developers pushing game design in new directions, and sure, not all of it works, but all of it is interesting. Every game featured in this video is going for something. It's really trying to do something new and exciting. And if that isn't awesome, I don't know what is. Although this video may be coming to a close, my time with the Game Boy has only just begun. So let me know. What did I miss? Are there any hidden gems I need to try out? Childhood favorites? I already have The Frog for Whom the Bell Tolls and Molemania on my radar. And if you've made it this far, I want to thank you for sticking around. Your support means a lot to me. I wanted to get this video out sooner, but I got sick and eventually just decided to record it while I was sick, which is right now. So hopefully I'll be feeling better by the time it's actually edited and out there. Alright, catch you in the next one.